For about 6 years, the police have had a hard time piecing together evidence that would bring to book the perpetrators who on 23rd June 2016 committed the cold-blooded murders of a Kenyan IJM investigator lawyer, his client and a taxi driver. But when detectives from DCI retrieved a cigarette butt, human waste and an empty can of Red Bull energy drink from a portion of an inhabited lush field secured using a yellow tape in Soweto, Mlolongo, Machakos County, the alleged killers were closer to jail than ever before, and justice was about to be served to the bereaved families. This is the comprehensive story of when and how Kenyan lawyer Willie Kimani and two other people disappeared under unclear circumstances after their last known location being Syokimau police post and the detailed investigations thereafter. Is this the case of a deal gone sour or extrajudicial killings as alleged? Stick around to find out. It all began on April 10, 2015 when Josephat Mwenda, a motorbike taxi driver and three others were arrested at Mlolongo Trading Center in Mavoko by administration police on suspicion of gambling and being in possession of marijuana. During the arrests, one of the administration police officers, Sergeant Frederick Leliman, fired his gun and injured Josephat Mwenda on his right arm. Thereafter, 4 days later, injured Mwenda was arraigned before Mavoko Law Courts in Athi River and charged with a criminal offense. Upset by the sergeant's action, Mwenda filed a complaint at IPOA, Independent Policing Oversight Authority, the government body that is mandated to ensure that the police are held accountable for the actions they take while discharging their duties. December 13, 2015, about 8 months later after the shooting ordeal, Sergeant Frederick once again was breathing down Mwenda's neck. Along Old Mombasa Road in Mlolongo, the same AP Senior Sergeant Frederick Leliman and OCS Moses Wambugu arrested Mwenda on allegation of riding an insured motorcycle registration number KMTR 828P plus other 5 traffic offenses. Several days later, once again, he was arraigned before the Mavoko Law Courts. At this point, the International Justice Mission, an international NGO whose main roles are to help vulnerable people get justice, rescuing victims and bringing criminals to book, intervened and appointed a lawyer, Mr. Edward Mbanya, who was to represent the accused person in both cases. IJM relocated the accused persons to safety due to constant threats that he was receiving from the same officer as we withdrew the case from IPOA. On 16th February 2016, the matter was before the court and Frederick Leliman testified against Mwenda. Mr. Mbanya was accorded time to cross-examine him, during which he directed tough questions towards Leliman in an attempt to exonerate his client. After the court session, Leliman, who had since left the courtroom, was waiting outside, but this time accompanied by 2 other men. The 2 men introduced themselves to Mwenda as detectives from Athi River Station and sought to arrest him of an alleged robbery with violence incident in Meru. They demanded that they go with Mwenda alone, but Mr. Mbanya insisted that he must accompany his client. At the CID office, the accused was asked to surrender his national identity card, where the officers made a copy. After several hours of what seemed like eternity, they were released with no further explanation. For further hearing, the Mavoko Court had allocated June 23, 2016 to the traffic offense case against Mwenda. Joseph Muirore, a hired taxi driver, left his residence in Githurai 44, driving his silver Toyota Fielder KBX 126C and headed to Kikuyu, located in the outskirts of Nairobi, where he picked Willie Kimani. Willie Kimani Kinuthia, 32 years old at this time, was a Kenyan human rights lawyer who worked with International Justice Mission IJM in Nairobi. He was a board member of Right Promotion Protection RPP and also a member of Law Society of Kenya LSK. Lawyer Willie Kimani got involved in this case 4 months before this day, on 14th Feb, when IGM officially took over Mwenda's case and he was assigned to represent him. The 2, Joseph Muirore and Willie Kimani, proceeded to pick Mwenda, who resided in Rongai. With Muirore driving, the team headed to court but not before stopping on Mombasa Road for a short meeting with Mr. Mbanya and IJM security detail. They all arrived at the court at 9 a.m. An hour later, 2 police officers, AP Japheth Kioko Kilundu and AP Stanislaus Wambua Munguti, testified against Mwenda before the court adjourned the matter to September 1, 2016. The hearing was never to be. The 3 would later be abducted shortly after leaving the courtroom and locked in a container before being brutally tortured and killed on that same day. Their mutilated bodies would later be found dumped in a river a few days following the abduction. When the court hearing was over, the different teams split, each going its way. Willie Kimani, however, remained with his team. His team's movement was well tracked thereafter. At noon, their car was in motion but stopped for about 3 minutes at Transview Estate within Mavoko. 27 minutes later, it was captured on CCTV cameras near City Cabanas, but rather than Joseph Muirore, a different person was in the driver's seat. Calls made to Willie's telephone line went unanswered, and so were others belonging to his team members. At 4:28 p.m., a construction worker was at Syokimau Administration Police Post on his motorbike. He was carrying a passenger, and when he had someone knocking from the inside of a container used as a holding cell in the camp, he stopped. Someone was waving to them from a grilled window. That individual threw out a note written on a tissue paper. The note read,
"Tafadhali pigia 0792 25 38 85. Mwambie Ross wakili na Mwenda wameshikwa na wako Syokimau kwa chief. Wako hatarini."
Which loosely translates to, call the number scribbled on the tissue paper. Tell the receiver to let Ross know that Lawyer and Mwenda have been arrested and are held at Syokimau Chief's camp. They are in danger. Document analysis done later confirmed that it was Willie Kimani who wrote the letter. Rebecca, who is Mwenda's wife, called Ross, an IJM officer, whose full names are Ross Gaki, to inform her what the stranger had told her. Ross called the construction worker to confirm the same and then asked him to keep the note safely, which would later be produced in court as evidence. Later in the evening, the two plus other worried relatives and colleagues rushed to the Syokimau post but were turned away. An officer who was at the booking desk said no persons they mentioned had been booked in at that post. The next day, June 24, at 1:44 a.m., the taxi that was carrying the three was found abandoned at Kamiritu in Limuru, but the whereabouts of its occupants remained a mystery and a report of missing persons was filed at the Flying Squad headquarters in Nairobi. On June 30, 2016, Oldonyo Sabuk Police Station filed a report that two bodies were retrieved at River Athi in Machakos County. The bodies were identified by the relatives the following day as belonging to Willie Kimani and Joseph Muirore. Later during the day, DCI deployed a homicide team to the river, and after hours and hours of searching, a third body that was positively identified as the remains of Mwenda was retrieved not so far from his teammates. Between 1st and 5th July 2016, 4 officers were arrested and officially charged with the murder of the 3 men on 18th July. 23rd August the same year, a police informant was arrested in connection with the murder and charged alongside the 4 officers. Trials commenced on 10th November 2016 as the prosecution lined a total of 44 witnesses to testify against the 5. Though AP Sylvia Wanjiku Wanjohi and AP Stephen Cheburet denied being present at the post on that day when the 3 men were brought in, the data collected from their phones by the court with the help of Communication Command Control Center based at Jogo House adequately placed them in and around the police post on that fateful day, 23rd June 2016. Sylvia Wanjohi was the officer at the booking desk the day the trio were brought into the police post. She was on duty and was in possession of the keys to the cells, therefore knew they were there. Though there wasn't any piece of evidence that could pin her to the murder of the 3, she played a role by not reporting about them being held in the cells without being booked. By keeping quiet about whether she knew the 3 were unlawfully detained in the cells, the court found her guilty for conspiring with the killers of the 3 men. During a court hearing, Sergeant Frederick admitted to have shot Mwenda only once using his personal Seska pistol on 10th April 2015 while standing 11 meters away. The sergeant, who is a sharpshooter, further revealed that he was armed with 2 magazines and 30 bullets, and that if he wanted to kill Mwenda, he would have shot him many times, of course trying to back up his claims that he shot Mwenda only once. But Mwenda's doctor treatment notes dated 10th April 2015 when Mwenda was shot were produced by the prosecution and revealed otherwise. Mwenda was shot twice, on the chest and at the upper arm. The sergeant was also put to task to explain why he was using a personal gun while on official duty, and why he did not record the same on the armory register. He defended himself by saying he recorded it in his notebook, but failed to produce it in court. When asked to confirm whether he arrested Mwenda the second time, he denied and said it was OCS Moses Wambugu who arrested him. However, the prosecution produced a statement he made in a case filed against Mwenda, where Leliman told the court that he and OCS Wambugu enforced the arrest. After the 10th April 2015 incident, the prosecutor also said that Mwenda kept going to the station searching for P3 form, but could only obtain it months later after IPOA got involved and filed a complaint before the OCS office. In the P3 form, however, the police indicated that a stray bullet hit him. During cross-examination, the prosecutor said that Sergeant Frederick held a grudge against Mwenda and planned his murder because he feared losing his job. To gather more evidence against him, his police-issued pocket phone was subjected to analysis. The police pocket phone serial number 35903304 showed very significant movements on June 23, 2016, the day the three men disappeared. The most striking was that the pocket phone remained static at a point called Soweto, near the Mombasa Highway, opposite Mastermind Tobacco Limited between 1930 hours and 2350 hours on 23 June 2016. The same pocket phone left that location thereafter and proceeded to move from Lolongo to Ruiru through the Eastern Bypass, joined Thika Road and shortly fell out of range past Juja. This site Soweto would soon prove to have been the missing piece in this puzzle and the cornerstone in this murder. Using GPS technology, the detectives located the Soweto site and established that it was an open field covered with knee-high grass and several acacia trees. They talked to people in a nearby residential area and it emerged that a lady had seen a motor vehicle parked by the roadside on that fateful night. The site was secured using a yellow tape and subjected to forensic evidence gathering with the help of FBI personnel. Cigarette filters, cans of Red Bull energy drink, and human waste that were concealed by the tall grass were gathered for analysis from the specific place where it was believed the killings happened. The specimen was screened for DNA and later subjected to comparison with other obtained from buccal swabs from Frederick Leliman, Stephen Cheburet, Sylvia Wanjiko, Leonard Mwangi, and police informer Peter Ngugi, performed by Dr. Kimani, a government chemist analyst. The analyst, who also received other items from the DCI and asked to determine presence of biological material, stated that the DNA profiles generated from the cigarette butts matched the DNA profile generated from the reference sample Peter Ngugi, therefore placing the police informer at the scene of crime. Peter Ngugi made two confessions, one a few days after the killing and another one in court during his defense hearing. In his chilling 21-page confession, read out loud by the Chief Inspector Geoffrey Kenyo, he began by making it known to the court his journey to becoming a police informer. He was operating a boda business in Waithaka, Dagoretti South constituency, when he was approached by a police officer from Kabete police stations on claims that he was collaborating with criminals in that town. When the harassments from the police persisted, he visited the station and struck a deal with the officer commanding station. The police would no longer bother him if he agreed to be a police informer. Even after the OCS was transferred to Bungoma, the relationship with the police never ceased. In April 2016, the new OCS that had been transferred to Mlolongo police station called him and asked him to visit him. It is during one of these visits that he was introduced to three police officers, amongst them Sergeant Leliman, but would only hold a substantive conversation with him a month later. In May 2016, Sergeant Leliman told him that Josephat Mwenda, in conjunction with IPOA, was pushing for his dismissal and that the case was set to be heard on 23 June 2016, and therefore wanted them to act when that day comes. Peter Ngugi met the sergeant once again on 22 June 2016 at the police canteen and he told him his plan was to kill Mwenda. Peter's job was to follow him after the court attendance and notify Leliman about his movements. On the following day, 23 June, he left his house at around 5:30 a.m. and arrived at Mlolongo town 2 hours later. While on his way to the police station, he met Leliman on the road driving his white car. He hopped in and sat at the front seat and was introduced to a lady who would show him the man to follow, Mwenda. Sergeant Leliman later dropped them off at Mlolongo stage so they could board a matatu to Mavoko locals in Athi River. He gave Peter 2,000 shillings and he told him to give 1,000 shillings to the female colleague. They arrived at the court at 9 a.m. and the woman showed him the wanted man from a distance of about 5 to 6 meters. The wanted man came out at around 11 a.m. accompanied by another man. He called Leliman and told him he was accompanied by another man. Leliman told him the other person was also a thief. The three, the wanted man, the other man and the taxi driver, got into their vehicle and left the court. Peter, Leliman and another Sergeant Leonard Mwangi Maina got into a separate car and followed them. They flagged down the car and Sergeant Leonard Mwangi told them that they were officers and that the three of them were under arrest. They were told to get out of their car and enter Sergeant Leliman's car. They complied with the orders. Peter took possession of the taxi and drove it to where he was supposed to dispose it. Sergeant Leliman overtook him on the way and he drove straight to the Syokimau AP post. The original plan was to drive to Meru and leave the car there, but he was informed on phone that Leliman had interviewed the driver, Joseph Moirore, who said the taxi was operating around Zimmerman and therefore driving that route would be risky, and also the car didn't have sufficient fuel. He thus decided to drive to Limuru because he knew the area well, and at around 3 p.m. he abandoned the vehicle at Kamiritu area. Another thing that was disturbing him was that the three had left their phones in the car. He managed to switch off 4 of the 5 phones but was unable to switch off one of them. After parking the car at Kamirithu, he threw away the phones and returned back to Mlolongo by 5 p.m., where he met his colleagues at the Connection Bar, as instructed by Leliman. They told him that the victims were safe at Syokimau AP posts. It is at this time that one of the victims managed to call his wife and told her he had been locked at Syokimau post and that he had no idea where his car was. Peter and his colleagues went back to the AP post where Leonard Mwangi handcuffed the victims. They were all put in the boot of a car before they were driven along the Nairobi-Mombasa road into a bush. Few minutes later, Stephen Cheburet joined them while still in the bush. They started to disagree on how they should kill the victims. Peter and Leonard Mwangi were of the view that they should release the 3 since they had already been exposed. However, Leliman and Cheburet insisted that the 3 must be killed. They argued for more than 3 hours and at around 9 p.m. they decided to kill them. The first victim, Mwenda, who was the main target, was killed using a polythene bag and a rope. His body was stashed in a sack and put in a boot. At around 11 p.m., the second victim was taken to a different corner and killed in the same style. After he died, he was put in 2 sacks because he was tall and couldn't fit in one sack. His body was then taken to the boot. The third one was strangled to death using a rope and a polythene bag too. Peter's role was to hand the victims over to Sergeant Leonard Mwangi, who would take them to Leliman and Cheburet, who would then strangle them. One by one, the bodies would be placed into the boot. He admitted to have smoked many cigarettes and threw the butts just where he stood. After all the victims were killed, they took off using the Nairobi-Mombasa road, and Cheburet, who claimed to have worked at Old Onyosabuk, led them to where they would dispose of their bodies. When they reached the scene, they threw the bodies into the river. They drove back using the same route, and at 4 a.m. they arrived at Mlolongo town, where they went into a pub near a restaurant and had their supper. After they had their supper, Leliman left at 4:30 a.m. Mwangi followed a few minutes later on foot because he lived around the place, while Cheburet left much later in the morning. Peter was left in the bar where he slept on the seat since he had drunk a lot of alcohol, which gave him a blackout. In one of the murder trials, the police informer revealed that Frederick Leliman bribed him with 15,000 to keep his name out of it, and that the transaction was recorded in a prison's book, and if allowed by the court, he would produce it to back up his allegations. In court, Peter tried to withdraw the confession, stating that he was tortured so as to confess, but the cigarette link was too strong and the court declined his request. The cigarette butt proved to be the weak link for the defense, and coupled up with Peter's confessions, the court was left with no other choice other than to convict them. After 6 years characterized by extreme public outrage, the High Court finally delivered its verdict on the murder of the trio. Lady Justice Jessie Lesit delivered the judgment in a packed courtroom on July 22, 2022. The judge analyzed a total of 117 exhibits and evidence given by 46 prosecution witnesses and 34 defense witnesses to reach her decision. After considering DNA samples tabled in court, a confession statement made by the fifth accused, Peter Ngugi, CCTV footage and mobile company cell site data, she ruled that the prosecution had proved beyond reasonable doubt that 3 officers, Leliman, Cheburet and Sylvia, had a well-laid-out plan to execute the 3 victims. However, one of the 4 officers, Sergeant Leonard Mwangi, was set free after prosecution failed to provide sufficient evidence linking him to the murder. Also found guilty was Peter Ngugi, a police informer accused of helping the 3 execute the murder plan. Lady Justice directed that those convicted be held until their sentencing on September 28, 2022. From the confessions and most of the evidence tabled before the court, it's clear that the target man was Josephat Mwenda and to some extent Lawyer Willie Kimani for representing him. Taxi driver Joseph Muiruri met his unfortunate end on that day for simply being in company of the duo. Hannah Kimani, Willie Kimani's widow, had this to say: "The verdict was a source of comfort to our hearts, even though it may not bring Kimani back. At least Kimani will not be included in the statistics of people who went through torture, went to abduction, tortured and killed without justice." Police killings have long been an issue in Kenya. This year alone, 72 people have been killed by the police. Last year, 187 people were killed, up from 158 in 2020. The Independent Policing Oversight Authority has received and processed 20,979 complaints since its inception 11 years ago, but only 3,437 investigations have been completed.